So the current crisis in Ukraine is really more about the United States and Russia. And I'll get into what I mean by liar's poker a little bit later. But I think that represents a fundamental response that's being ignored, but I think is essential. So what's happening here? Well, we have a bully. And one of the things we know about bullies is you only need to stand up to them once. And very few people ever stand up to a bully. And that's what's happening. And this person knows that people are not going to stand up to him. They're going to look to placate and try to find a way to end a crisis. So fundamentally, we have genocide. And we're seeing a lot of inadequate responses. And the thing that maybe drives us all crazy is when people start sending their prayers, right? Don't send prayers, answer prayers. There are things that are needed and things that are essential. And there's a humanitarian crisis. There's so many things that are heartbreaking that are happening over there. But we also have to see what's behind all this to try to solve this and solve it in real terms and solve it sustainably. So the issue here is, of course, we have what we call good intentions, and people do not respond to good intentions. They respond to their self-interest. And so what's happened is, and let's be clear, we have a global order for things that people don't like to think about very much, which is energy and commodities, the things that drive the global economy. So what's at stake here is a source for energy. For instance, Russia provides 12% of the world's oil and 17% of the world's natural gas. Russia and Ukraine provide 30% of the world's wheat. And on top of that, a majority of nickel and other fundamental components to even electronic vehicles and various batteries and other new technologies, as well as basic industry. A lot of these commodities come from Russia. And so we have this world order that we thought, well, everyone's economic self-interest is being served, so we're fine. The issue, of course, is that Russia really is a minnow with a lot of natural resources, but not a real thriving economy, and they really don't deserve to be on the world stage. Well, there's one way to get on a world stage, and we've seen that from Putin. So now, let me talk about liar's poker, right? So people may know this story, but very quickly, a guy named John Meriwether was running the trading floor at Salomon Brothers, and he was doing quite well. The CEO, John Gutfreund, didn't really like that. So Gutfreund came out, and liar's poker is this game that traders play, and we don't need to know the details. But Gutfreund came out and said, I'll play you a hand for $1 million. Now, staged like that, and this is what Putin has done. Putin has said, I'm going to play a hand for $1 million. You don't think I'm willing to take that risk? I am. I want to see if you are. Now, if we match him or even exceed him slightly, he still wins because he's the bold leader. He's made these big moves. At the very least, if he gets, now there's a certain concession, he says, well, just don't join NATO and be a neutral country. Well, that's victory to him, right? And he controls the media, he controls all these things. So the only response is what Meriwether did. He said, not $1 million, but $10 million. So now suddenly this order of magnitude difference made Meriwether the victor no matter what happened, because even if he lost, he was seen as the bold global leader. Well, a 10x response to Putin is not going to be a losing move because the United States and Western Europe, NATO, we have the resources to back this clown down. Now he's got his nuclear weapons and he thinks, well, you'll never back down because I've got nuclear weapons and you may think I'm willing to use them and you're unwilling to take that chance. Well, let's think about this. In the long run, if someone is willing to do what no one else is willing to do, that person is going to win, right? That's sort of the Kaiser Sose method of dealing in negotiations. As long as you have the will to do things that others won't, you win. And right now, that's Putin. I mean, it's unimaginable that tanks would roll, that we'd see Kiev being bombed, that all these horrors would be going on in the modern era. But you have an unrepentant bully who is willing to do things that he believes no one else will. So we have to look at the long run. The long run is we can't placate, we can't negotiate, we can't have middle ground. And I've said this where there's no such thing as half measures, right? You either fold your arms and say, well, that's just the way it is and Ukraine is not our problem and we don't care, or you completely engage fully and you back down and you probably get regime change in Russia. There's nothing in between because anything in between is victory for Russia, right? So the long run, let's be clear, it's about a global economy, it's about energy, commodities, resources, access to those resources, and the fair trade to those resources. The big consumer of those resources for the last 15 years has been China. China plays a big role here. Now we know about Taiwan, we know about all these other issues. All of this is wrapped up into essentially the problem is, are we going to let a bully have his way? And believe me, China is looking very closely to see, well, what is the world really willing to do? And they've got some targets in mind themselves, and they've already engaged in one target at Hong Kong. And we know, Taiwan is on everyone's mind. And so when we look at the picture, I kind of say like a chess player, see the whole board, like what's really happening here. So the way I describe it, if I want to use some chess analogies, Russia, we're treating them like they've got a queen and they're just a pawn. They don't have any real power. They have resources, they have nuclear weapons for sure, and we can stand down the nuclear weapons. I have no doubt about that. And commodities are commodities. They don't produce anything that's very valuable. They don't produce things the world really wants. China has power, but China is not the king with the queen. That's the United States. And the United States has to play a role where they understand, look, we either are going to be isolationist, which makes no sense for our economy, makes no sense for any of our allies, and we can basically create a world where there's a lot less uncertainty, because right now certain uncertainty is spiking. We have to make some sacrifices in the short term. So if you're paying twice as much for gas, well, drive half as much. I mean, there are simple solutions in the very near term, right? And there is that wisdom, the liar's poker wisdom of uncompromising, right? So don't compromise with a bully, because you only need to sit him down once, right? And then you've solved that problem. So here's the issue. We have a global economy that's interconnected, and there's opportunity for great growth in commodities and in energy. And so, we see this, from an investment perspective as a real opportunity to build a foundation, and a foundation of high growth, because more and more where there is certainty and security, there will be economic opportunity. So the uncertainty and the unwillingness to sacrifice, which means you've created fear, you've created a lack of security, that impacts economically. And so, of course, there's this human carnage that's unimaginable. There's suffering that's unimaginable. But on top of that, there is what's really going on, a global economic order that's being disrupted. And we want to have fair players in that global chain. We don't mind competition. We don't mind, fair deals, but we really mind a totalitarian state just grabbing economic value. And that shouldn't be tolerated. So I'm advocating the liar's poker approach, where we go in 10x, and the world will be safer, more certain, and more secure.